What? Why are you shaking your head?
You're welcome.
Welcome to the CFF All Access Pod. Once again, myself, Eric Froton, and it's a dynamic duo today with my co-host, Zach Hall, again for June, which is Dynasty month. So we're going to get into a little bit of roster construction. And as part of that, we figured we'd kind of go position by position. We pulled up a couple of my leagues, one of Zach's leagues. I pulled in the Blue Bloods too as well from one of Josh's leagues. And we're going to kind of go through what has worked and what championship rosters looked like in these expert leagues that we participated in last year. So we'll try to go, like I said, by position, show you a few groups, say, all right, well, this is a group that worked, this didn't, and give our positions our opinions on how to kind of attack these positions and just strategically how you'd look at these freshman drafts. So without any further ado, we're going to start off with quarterbacks. So last year, 26 QBs threw 400 or more passes this year. Obviously, there's different formats. And when it comes to scoring, a lot of what you're going to be looking at is going to have to do with the scoring system. As we've talked about, is it 4-point passing touchdown? Is it 6? We even have a league, we do an industry league where they simply would not allow the 6s. I agreed to a gentleman's compromise of 5 begrudgingly, but luckily we made it happen there. So we're going to be able to look at 4, 5, and 6-point passing touchdown leagues that we're kind of involved in. I kind of see how that affects the QB scoring. And that's obviously, we don't have to deal with this as much with the running backs and the wide receivers, though we will kind of get into PPR and the difference between that. But with the QBs, is it 4 or it's 6, right? And that's important because, like we said, 26 QBs threw 400 plus passes. 34 QBs threw for 3,000 yards or more. Now, when we think about that metric, it's not one that we think is a very difficult bar to clear. We think about 3,000 yards as sort of like a benchmark. That's where we need to be. Fewer and fewer, only 34 cleared it. We're looking at 4,000 yards, and this is obviously extrapolated over the season. Only 2 quarterbacks threw for more than 4,000 yards last year, and one of them was Michael Penix. He almost threw for 5,000. He was, in the 4,900 range. He had 15 games to do it. The other one, Bo Nix, 14 games. So you look at that and say, wow. And that's pretty consistent, frankly. It was a similar number the year before. This year, we almost had a third with Carson Beck. He had 3,949 yards. My Carson Beck, as we all know, my beloved. But when it comes to quarterbacks and touchdowns, 10 quarterbacks cleared 30 touchdown passes last year. Very, very important metric to be aware of when we're talking about the difference between the 6 and the 4-point scoring. 23 quarterbacks threw 25 touchdowns or more. So we're looking at a league that, unlike the conventional pocket passers of, the NFL, you can skin a cat many different ways with quarterback. Zach, if you don't mind, tell me a little bit about, kind of how you view the position, some of the things you look for before we get into system and, QBs in general for you when you're scouting Dynasty.
Yeah. One of the first things I look at is obviously going to be the touchdowns. I always have a general rule where I'm trying to get a quarterback that's going to get me 35 touchdowns, whether it's through the air or on the ground. And those are the guys that I'm really trying to identify early in the season, who's going to do that. And you're right. It definitely plays into how much you're going to get for a touchdown. And that can really change, how you're going to look at who's valuable, who's not. But I thought you touched on it great where, if you get a guy that's going to throw for 3,500 yards and get you 30 plus touchdowns, right? That's somebody I'm definitely gonna try and go for. I'm obviously looking at systems, the systems that you see the dual threat guys really thrive in. That's something I'm always gonna try and find, especially in a dynasty where the dual threat guys, especially with injuries, right? You're kind of wanting, hey, who's the starter, and then who's going to be that backup, right? Is there, or that next man up? And that's something I look at quite a bit too. Is um, that next man up piece, who that's going to be. And when I'm thinking about dynasty, I'm I try, and if I'm finding success with a guy like a Bo Nix, right? You're gonna try and get that next man up, so you can really have a monopoly on that system, or on that value. So those are a couple things I look at. The scoring is a big one with quarterbacks, just because they touch the ball so much, and then obviously any quarterback that is going to be running for over 500 yards, always, that's something that I look for as well. But those are really the main things that I'm looking for. Just kind of general when I'm kind of doing some research on quarterbacks, and then system. I do a ton around systems, play callers, what they have success with. So that's kind of where when I'm laying out um, my guys for dynasty, and I'm looking at my current roster, um, I like to put them in buckets where I have like the guys, my elite guys, right? The guys that you can play every week. I call them streamers, the guys that maybe you don't want to rely on every single week, but you're going to get a couple weeks there throughout the season. And then you got your next man up, or kind of a handcuff type guy. Um, and then I'm looking at the guys that have potential that aren't yet proven, but you feel really good about. To me, it's going to be, you're thinking about a guy like, it's not a great example, but John Mateer at Washington State, right? The system is there, but you don't necessarily know, one, if he's going to be the guy. He's in a competition with Eckhouse right now, but he's a guy that he can do a little bit on the ground, and that's a system where they're going to score points. So he kind of fits in that bucket for me, where I'm also trying to find some of those guys that, hey, it's a great system fit, or he's just a dynamic athlete that I think is going to really be able to put up some points this season. Um, and then kind of start to find some of those guys to kind of supplement the rest of my team. After you kind of have, like your Dylan Gabriel this year, right? You have him, and maybe you throw in like a KJ Jefferson, and it's like, all right, who are those next guys to kind of start to fill the gaps, or think about. I thought you did a great job talking about last week, finding guys that it might not be this year, but that year two, right? Where who's going to really contribute in year two. So, and a lot of those potential guys fall into that category for me. So just kind of a general overview for me. That's really what I'm looking at, or trying to find in these dynasty leagues.
Yeah, all great points that I will look to elaborate on. We're going to take a quick break for right now, and then we'll come right back and develop that a little bit further. All right. So, as we kind of got into, and that was some great stuff there, Zach. Important points about, like you said, projecting the next man up
Yeah.
at high profile, at least passing offenses. You can get into production, obviously, in general, but quarterbacks tend to vary in terms of their ability to run from. That's not something like system wise you can kind of project. So that's kind of a case by case basis. But if we look at last year, a couple of systems that were incredibly productive in terms of the passing yardage, that have guys who are either going to be on their way out or upperclassmen. You look at Oklahoma State, Alan Bowman quietly had 3,460 yards, just under that 3,500 yard threshold. That was the 16th most in the country. We've seen what Gundy does time and time again. Maybe they bring in another, it's worth looking at. Do they bring in another transfer? Possibly. But, system wise, Oklahoma State, I don't see Alan Bowman getting hardly any respect in our dynasty drafts. And that's a guy that, sure, 15 passing touchdowns because of the Ellie Gordon effect. Well, I'm not worried about the Ellie Gordon effect with the next man up. For next year, you get 1 year out of him, and then, it's going forward. Obviously, a system I really always try to prioritize. Another one, Troy, year in and year out, I feel like they're underrated in terms of their usage. We've seen the receivers be successful. You had basically 3 guys last year. You could kind of go across the board. Chris Lewis is hurt now, unfortunately, but they took their turns kind of blowing up. And while they didn't have one true alpha, even though Jabre Barber was pretty close, they were really effective. And for Gunnar Watson, he eclipsed 3,500 yards. John Sumrall will be at Tulane this year. Brought in Cooper Lagasse. You got sorry, that was Tulsa. But he's at Tulane now. That's a fact. That's something I want to be involved in. And you're already starting to sort of see that in terms of the way that people are shifting their draft, philosophies around that. You mentioned Washington State, but dude, a guy who, as we discussed, I looked at a lot of different Dynasty rosters. A guy who keeps popping up on our Dynasty leagues, the experts, on the successful teams in each of the 5 leagues I analyzed, is Joey Aguiar for Appalachian State. I mean, the Appalachian State QB had always been a very low volume, sort of a prospect. The 3 running backs of yesteryear that they just sort of churn out. It was kind of assumed, all right, well, it'll be the Nate Noel show. Well, that didn't quite happen. They ended up throwing the ball a lot, 3,700 passing yards, 33 touchdowns for Aguiar, 8 yards per attempt. I mean, he was out there gunslinging. And a large reason that his receiver, Robinson, he's going in the top 10 rounds in our best ball drafts. That's something that I want to be aware of what happens in the succession plan there at Appalachian State. So Memphis as well is another hot one. Yeah, Hennigan's getting there. He's up. He's an upperclassman. I want the next guy in Memphis. Every year, it doesn't matter if it's Silverfield, doesn't matter if it's Norvell, doesn't matter if it's Fuente. They're rocking and rolling at Memphis. So those, some of my personal favorites. Obviously, I want to throw in Colorado State too with the Jay Norvell system. Once again, I mean, Fowler Nicolosi over there wasn't particularly great. He still threw for over 3,400 yards, And lastly, I would say one more guy that has been on this. I mean, every single team that I see that made it, the one guy that I see is on all of them was Chandler Rogers for North Texas. Very, very low cost of acquisition. He's a Cal now, we know. But a low cost of acquisition, you could get him in the dispersal draft. Wasn't somebody who was taken. You can still get him. And I mean, I'm in the Nate league right now when we're doing it. We're in I think we're in 13, round 13. We're 24 guys. So that's like round 26 in a supplemental. You're still seeing upperclassmen, that junior, senior mold, who are still, maybe 550, 504 type guys. They're still out there at this point. So I feel like if you're out there and you have to prioritize positions, QB needs to be prioritized, and it has to go with the proper systems. Again, that would be, Chandler Morris this year goes over North Texas, but having not done it yet, having been injured every single year, that's another fertile hunting ground that you can go and sort of take a shot at those guys behind them, and you can profit from it. So anything else you want to add on the QBs to kind of elaborate?
Yeah. No, so when you brought up Joey Aguilar, that made me think, because he really rated out as one of the most consistent quarterbacks last year as far as weekly performance. Not a super high ceiling like you were going to see with those elite guys like a Michael Penix or a Bo Nix, who those guys, you might get a 40, 45 point week from them. Joey Aguilar, you're not really expecting that, but his floor was so high. And I think that's something too, when you think about these dynasty rosters. I mean, obviously you want those guys that have that really high ceiling, but I think when you get into some of these leagues and you look at the teams that are really successful, they're going to have the quarterbacks that are are very consistent, right? They can count on week to week, like a Joey Aguilar, who he might only get you 25 to 28 points. But if you have 2 quarterback slots and you can fit him in every single week, and that these other teams in the league might not have that consistency at the position, where you're really gonna have a better chance at success because of that. And as I was writing up some of our quarterback profiles for what we got coming up soon. I was trying to find or point out some of those guys that maybe don't pop off in the rankings, but like Brady Cook's another guy, right? Just a super consistent
Definitely.
all last year, right? And if you can find spots for guys like that in your dynasty roster, and you obviously have to pair them with guys that have a high ceiling, but when you can just rely on a guy like a Brady Cook or a Joey Aguilar to give you that consistent 25 to 30 points, you're going to really set yourself up in a good spot to compete in your dynasty league.
Yeah, and we'll get into what successful in dynasty leagues looked like at the quarterback position. But just speaking from, we'll run down it. The industry dynasty, David Holden was the champion last year. He went 9-1, rostered 11 quarterbacks. What I found really interesting, this team fascinated me. Like, I looked at this team up and down for hours. Didn't have a particularly sexy QB room, and it's like he's kind of the one exception. Daquan Finn, and this is again, we'll go to style. This is 5-point passing touchdown, 0.04 points per passing yardage. So this is a passing yardage suppressed league, and points. You got the 5 touchdowns. Daquan Finn, 22.7 points per game was his every week start. That was his one. And then he rotated between Nicholas Vattiato, 21.5. Spencer Rattler got some starts at 20.5. And then finally, Cade Klubnik, he actually started in the final at 18.1 points per game. And that sort of shows it was an attrition sort of a thing, just sort of a rotation. He really played matchups beautifully. Yeah. If you can have a good enough room that's deep enough, man, he just took the good matchup every week and he played it flawlessly. He had an unbelievable running back room, and his wide receivers just in the PPR format, I just carried them. But that was, the exception on the quarterback room, but you can kind of get away with that in the suppressed passing leagues. It balances out the skill and the QBs, because you look at the runner-up. It was J.D. Yonke in that league. He only went 6-4. All right, so it wasn't like he was juggernaut, but his team hit. It was a different kind of dynasty team where he had younger guys and they crested at the right time. Just squeaked in the playoffs, made it to the finals. And he's a guy. He had Chandler Rogers, and he started for him in the finals. Another guy that was on quite a few dynasty rosters, and it speaks to the opposite of Rogers. It is the build method, and that was Drake May. He took a beating. You heard a lot of slander on Drake May's good name throughout the lead up to the draft process. His footwork wasn't as good as 22. Longo was gone, which, mechanically it affected him. But from a fantasy point of view, he was rocking. And on quite a few of these successful teams, again, we're on the runner-up, Drake May's doing it, and he's involved. Shedeur Sanders, he also had. And another guy that was more consistent but wasn't sexy, Graham Mertz. Not bad last year. Only 21 points in this format. That's like a stripped-down league. So the thing is, JD, he rode those QBs. He had those 3 top ones that are all right on the money. Chandler Rogers, Drake May, Spencer Sanders, all 27-point plus in this format. Not a lot of QBs were at that range. You saw David's entire team did. But then we look at the highest scoring team, right? And it's not like you're getting blown away again. That was me, just saying. High scoring team in that format. I only rostered 8 quarterbacks, but I had a good, strong top 4. Caleb Williams helps, 31.5 points. He was the only quarterback out of all of these 3 top teams that averaged over 29 points per game. And that's because of the suppressed scoring system. From there, Garrett Green, 27.5. Again, the ability to run and throw, the true dual threat, very important. I had Joey Aguilar, as mentioned, and Preston Stone as well. But unfortunately, Preston Stone, only 24.5 points per game. The SMU system, really attractive at 6-point passing touchdowns. We'll see what happens with the ACC. I haven't had a lot of shares of Stone. I'm curious kind of how you feel about him with SMU going to the ACC and what you kind of look at his projection.
Yeah, so Stone is a guy that I actually just finished his quarterback profile, and I started it with, he's a guy I really like. I really like Preston Stone. I actually, in the one dynasty I'm in, I have him rostered. But I am concerned the step up to the ACC, I think, is going to be that schedule is quite a bit tougher. And he's a guy, and it's not as big of a deal, but he does have the 3 bye weeks, which just makes it a little bit less ideal when you're having to find 3 different weeks for him. I still think he's going to have a good season. I did drop his projection just a little bit because of that uptick in the opponents that they're going to be playing this year. I don't think it's going to be I think it's going to be an easier transition than some of these teams like a UCLA into the Big Ten and that. But I do think it's going to be a little different. I also think too, that's an offense where it's we need a receiver or 2 to really step up this year and help him out a little bit. I think
Good point.
they have some talented guys, some guys I really like. I'm waiting for Hudson to break out.
Dude, we're all waiting on Jordan Hudson.
But it's like they have the guys there, so I think it's going to be dependent on that as well. Can they have a couple of these receivers,
Jake
help
Bailey
him out
too.
in this offense?
Like, is it going to happen this year, Jake Bailey? Because
Yeah.
I feel like we heard good things about him in the spring, and he's almost the nominal one. But
Yeah.
God, Jordan Hudson, what's going on, man? It's time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree. And just the jump in strength of schedule, you wonder where that's a traditional. That's a honey hole. SMU, Sonny Dykes brought that place up. What does it look like this year? And with Stone entering year 3, how is the succession plan ready? Is it time to go for it right now? How does that look in the ACC? But regardless, I'm in. I'm pretty good on that. Moving to, I'll go through the CFB winning edge here at Dynasty and kind of look at that, because that is a 20-team league with 6-point passing touchdowns. So it's a nice little difference maker you see between them. So this is the same in terms of passing yardage you get, but for passing touchdowns, it's 6. And it makes a difference. Drake May is a nickel draft night 1. Also the high scorer in the regular points. It was a wire to wire. Brandon Underwood did an incredible job. Rostered 13 QBs. Drake May was the 1, but he had 32.5 points per game as opposed to 28.5 with the previous scoring system. It's a 4-point difference by just 5 to 6. I saw, in terms of the difference in scoring system between these quarterbacks, it's about 5 to 6, about 5.5 roughly difference between the 4-point passing touchdown system to the 6 on a per game basis. Substantial. 5 points matters. So you see it with that. Aguiar goes from 25 to 30.5 now. Big difference. And again, Aguiar is on the winner, and he's the number 2 QB on that winning team. And that's the guy in a 20-team league. He picked him up in the draft last year. So that's somebody you didn't have to go and invest in. And a lot of these G5 QBs, you don't even need to invest in them early, because you're gonna probably have to go for the high-profile Arch, Jackson Arnold, the Dante Moores. But there's a lull in between that first round and the premium guys, and where you can wait 4, 5, 6 rounds on those supplementals and get pretty talented guys who are coming in and are going to have jobs at G5 that weren't taken before. So I do think that there's a duality to it of where the value is with the QBs. You go early on the big boys, you don't get one. I think the value is in waiting and value plucking, because we have another guy that's also here that we also heard and was on the last one's winner, Nicholas Vattiato. Quietly, didn't cost a thing. Had a rough bowl game in 22. He came in and started, and he was almost like they had the 2 QB system, and he was more of the running QB. So I looked at him I almost dismissed him and hand waved him, because I'm like, we got a solo threat here. And he didn't look particularly good at all in the bowl, especially throwing. He ran, I want to say like 111, but you can who knows what that number's coming from in my head. But it goes again to show May, Aguiar, Vattiato, and Thomas Castellanos, BC. That's a 20-team league. This is a very competitive league. You got Drake May and then 3 guys that were nobodies heading in. You forget it, Castellanos was the 2. Like it was right down the wire with him and Moorhead coming in. And Moorhead, was the incumbent. He was transferring in from UCF. Hitting on those QBs where you don't have to invest big and you can stack the rest of that roster with big, high-profile running backs, it's a winning strategy. It really is. So, feel free to kind of color that and put your own spin on what you think roster construction wise with the QBs, and then we'll move on to running backs.
Yeah, just real quick, that I've been looking at in drafts and the hit rate, and how positions fall, and it's I think your point about getting those G5 quarterbacks and really any position. It's funny because when you look at the first few rounds, obviously the hit rate's better than it's going to be because you're really we've identified maybe the top freshmen or the guys that were transferred and are out now at a spot like a Chandler Morris is probably going to be out there for some in some leagues. A guy like him where the hit rate's probably it's a little bit easier to predict there. But then when you get into kind of those rounds 6 through 12, which is I think where guys start to take a lot of shots at Power 5 freshmen, the hit rate really drops. And then it comes back up when you get kind of towards the mid-teens and into the 20s. And I think that's when you're seeing that's when you're starting to find guys that probably the older juniors, seniors that you guys avoid just because, hey, I'm only going to get 1 or 2 years out of them. But I think that's when you really start to see a lot of those Power 5 guys go that you're not super sure on at the moment. But like Vadiato probably wasn't getting drafted then, but a guy kind of like that, right? Where he's in a system that's produced some good quarterbacks and you're like, I'll take a shot, right? I need another quarterback. I'll take a Power 5 guy. And that hit rate starts to jump up just a little bit more once you get into those mid-teens. And that's when you're starting to see more of those they're the G5 guys that are going to start, but you're a little bit unsure of. So I thought that was a good point. Just bringing that up where you can find really good value in the G5 at this position. And just the last thing I'm going to say, really interesting to hear who was on these rosters. I was looking at in my Dynasty League, we have one guy that he's only won at one time, but he competes every single year for it. He's always in the playoffs. And I've been looking at his, and it's really the way he's constructed his roster. It's interesting because he's not taking a ton of chances on young guys, young freshmen. He's really going out and finding guys that like he had Bo Nix and Penix last year, which is just like, I mean, how do you even compete with that? He didn't actually end up winning the league, but he was right there. Will Howard, Garrett Green, Jordan Travis, Graham Mertz was a guy that you mentioned right earlier.
Yes. Yes.
Jalen Daniels. Too. Yeah. And it's like, that's a guy that he didn't even draft. He went undrafted and he picked him up. And so, I mean, there's going to be guys out there, but if you can find those gems at the quarterback, that's going to really elevate your dynasty team.
Yeah, absolutely. And it goes for the Blue Bloods, dynasty here too. Josh was the runner up. Garrett Green, Caden Salter. Caden Salter's another one. You cannot understate how important Caden Salter was to everybody. Obviously, he's going first round now, but it just kind of goes to show a kid who flunked out of Tennessee. And again, he was in a battle with Jonathan Bennett. So as long as that lasted. But, it just goes to show. And then obviously my binky boy, Carson Beck, he was in my home league. He was the QB. He was, every week starter for myself as well. Jackson Dart was great, but we'll move on to running backs here. I think that if he does it, we're going to go and take a quick break and then get on to the running back position. Excellent. And before we do that, let's hit my man Steve Jackson there, and he makes a very good point. Projecting next up is harder with the portal, and talent becomes more important now. And you look at teams just before we go in terms of the QB. Hey, Alabama, Ohio State, the big boys, Event Georgia, Gunnar Stockton, these guys, Vandergriff just went to Kentucky. You go and you stay the course with some of these guys, and they're going to go and land premium gigs, preferably for us. You want to see some of the Alabama guys go down the G5. Like, hey, Simpson, Lonergan, get out of there. We know Aaron Nolan's going to have to find a new home soon. Like, I'm telling you, that's happening. So, absolutely valid point. Guys who wait their turn and get beat out, just because they get beat out at this spot, and if they're talented guys, they can still pay major dividends down the road. And that's a great point. Look at even Dylan Morris with James Madison. He's got a starting job, for those deeper leagues. So, but we'll get into, running backs now, sort of make the transition. And, with this position, what I really like looking at is the overall, what does the production look like overall? How many guys are doing it? Because it's in a position where you need to have a lot of them. You can't just have one or two runs. You got to have depth. You have to build, in my opinion. Like, you can have the top of the QB room and you can be all right. You get 2, 3, and you kind of heard that. You can have one star, one Drake May, one Caleb, and then you can fill in the 2s and the 3s with a good solid group. It just doesn't work that way, in my opinion, with the running backs and how the position has changed, frankly. I went back to 2018 to kind of give you, some perspective. In 2018, there were 59 running backs who ran for 1,000 yards or more. 42 of them went for 1,010. This year, 41 ran for 1,000 yards or more. 31 running backs with 1,010. We're talking about, that's a 50%, almost reduction here of that. If we're putting it, actually, it would be 50, it would be a 33% or so. It's like right in that 2/3. So, I mean, we're talking about sea changes in terms of how the position is used. And it just sort of, goes to look at, well, all right, well, where is this coming from? And what's interesting about that is the division of it is where it's coming. 41, with 1,000 yards, 22 P5, 18 G5. Kind of a balance there. So it isn't like the Power 5 is the more dominant. You want to focus on more of those. It's a pretty close. 22 to 18 is pretty close split. When it comes to 1,010, 15 and 13 Power 5 advantage to the G5. So, I mean, you're going to get production down there. And when we're talking about freshman drafts and we're talking about, where we're prioritizing, it's just nature that the P5 is going to have the more prioritized running backs because you have more certainty. You have a higher recruiting rate. There's more sort of scrutinized these running backs are and more parsed. They simply aren't going to be able to have the depth of these 3-star running backs that are just coming in generic, 80 to 85, 247 grades. How is that running back room going to shake out? We just don't know. We don't know how these guys work out. So the interesting thing is, if you can play that market right, if you can play the information game and look and see what are the buzz guys, where's this coming? How are the spring games? Watch the spring games. Look at the spring reports. Look at the summer reports. That's where you really get the value. And you can bolster sort of that room through acquiring G5 running backs who, if you look at it, 2023, the same numbers are constant for 2022. There was 40 running backs who had 1,000 yards. And that was a straight 2020 split. So that was 50-50. And then you went over to 2022, it was the same amount. It was 28 had 1,010 with a 15-13 split. Again, that's where we're at. If anything, if there's something that I'm looking at that sort of differentiates where, things that have changed, sort of trends, 2022, 37 running backs with 200 plus carries, a 17 P5 to 20 G5 split. More volume was happening in the G5 level. This year, that changed to just 27 running backs that had 200 carries, down from 37. So what I see and what I've kind of looked at, and we'll go through the rosters as well. The pass catching running backs become so much more important in today's day and age. So I'll let you take the floor, Zach. Tell me a little bit, about how you approach running backs and some thoughts.
Yeah, you just nailed it right there. The pass catching running backs, right? That's the first thing I really look at. So one thing about the running back position in general, and I'm not sure your thoughts on this, but I think that it's one of those where when you go into a season, you always at the top end, I always feel the best about it, being able to identify those top guys. But running back is by far it dries up the fastest, and it's the hardest position, in my opinion, out of the top quarterback, receiver, running back to stream. It feels like you can always find some guys at quarterback that can stream based on matchups. You can also do it with running back, but I just find that it's generally a little bit tougher. So if you don't have, if you're light on running backs, the running back depth on your roster, it's really hard to overcome any of that. The G5 angle is a really good one. I know on my teams when I've had the most success, it's when I've been able to find some of those G5 guys that you don't have to spend a lot of high draft pick on them, or thinking about even waivers, your budget, right? Maybe you don't have to spend as much there to get some of those guys early in the season, but they're difference makers. I mean, looking at some of the teams that are really successful in my dynasty league, they're filled with those G5 guys, and those guys, a lot of them were either drafted late, or they were claimed throughout the season. But guys like Kamani Vidal, right, like busted onto the scene 2 years ago, just this really solid guy to have on your roster. That's just gonna help you out. Malik Sherrod last year at Fresno, I know it was a little bit
crushed in terms of his receiving. He did 44, I want to say receptions, maybe that sticks out.
Yeah. So just some guys like that, but kind of back to the point, you want the guys that they're going to utilize in the pass game. And then, again, I feel like running back, the more depth you can build on your roster, the better off you're going to be, just because that's one where it just runs out so fast. When you're, and this is running back 2 is one where I really like to handcuff. So if, like, let's say you have Devin Neal, on your team, I want Highshaw as well, right? Talented running back, but I'm going to go and get that guy just in case Neal, something happens to him, or after he off to the NFL, right? You got that next piece in there. We talked a little bit about having that next man up at quarterback. I love it even more at running back, just because it's, if you can identify that next guy that it's not going to transfer, kind of what we just got done talking about, you could be in a pretty good spot as far as monopolizing a system that produces really good running backs. So I tend to look at it that way as well. A great example, you talked about Hennigan at Memphis, but what they did last year,
like Watson
last year, and now you bring in Mario Anderson, who I would assume is out there in some dynasties. He might still be on some rosters, but he didn't do a whole lot at South Carolina last year, so he's a guy that maybe somebody dropped for some space on their roster. But just trying to find guys like that have hit the portal, go into a system like Memphis. So yeah, that's kind of where my head goes with the running back piece.
Yeah, and what's really interesting, and I'm glad you touched on Watson too, because I was going to get on him. In terms of the receiving backs, right? In terms of the top 7 receiving backs last year, 6 of them came from the G5. That's heavy duty. I mean, that's what more do you need to know on that? All of them had over 40 receptions, in that front, and were factors. We're talking about, you mentioned Sherrod, mentioned Blake Watson already, Ashton Genty, Mean Dean Connors, as we know, all over the place. Mean Dean Connors is a top 10 guy top 10 round running back
Yep.
in the startup best balls we're doing. So, when it comes to the prioritizing and wanting those high volume receiving running backs, I mean, that's what happened last year. Jermaine Brown as well, for UAB, which just bodes well for our boy Lee Beebe, right? And I'll leave it with this here. In 2022, this is crazy. In 2022, 27 running backs, all right, had 30 receptions or more. Last year, 18. I mean, you look at that trend, and what I'd say, and that's not just with the carries, because like we said, we just went through that in terms of the reduction in the 1,000-yard backs. We go from 59 in 2018 to 41, 40 the year before. It just goes to see the specialization where they're keeping guys fresh. There aren't as many bell cows anymore. There's only so many Ollie Gordons. And, the ones that do are increasingly more important. It's just that simple. And that goes for volume on the receiving side too.
Yeah.
The changing over, the constantly having a fresh guy in, that sort of NFL ethos worked its way down to our level too, 27 to 18. So you have to have the more volume, the better in that front.
Yep.
And the G5, you cannot ignore G5 running backs, in that sense. I think that's really what I see here.
Yep, I agree with you.
So in terms of roster composition, right, we'll go back. We'll start again with the Industry Dynasty League. These are all the same. That's the beauty about running back. It's apples to apples, except for, obviously, PPR. Some leagues don't have PPR. My home league, long time, we didn't do PPR because we started it, forever ago, and we refused to change our system. And there's some elements I really like about it, but I kind of wanted to get into that now to kind of show what the difference is points per game. It's wild, and running backs really do. I mean, they're pivotal in our league because it neuters receivers. But we'll get into Industry Dynasty League. We'll go back to David's team. Top league didn't have great QBs. This is by far the least inspiring QB room. Man, the running backs brought it. Penny Boone had took the least amount of carries in order to hit 1,010 last year at Toledo. So you had him at 21.5. Blake Corum at 21. What's really interesting about Corum, he's on a couple of these successful teams. He didn't catch passes. But he punched in so many touchdowns. It didn't matter. He was still a 21 point per game guy. But that's almost like a dying model, kind of. No pass catching, maybe 100 yards, maybe 8-10 receptions or something. It's against the grain. And so is Quentin Cooley for Liberty. Quentin Cooley, one of the great breakouts of 2023, 23.5 points per game. He led the team. And Quentin Cooley had 6 receptions all year. But he still put up 23.5 because he scored.
Touchdowns, yep.
But you have to have the touchdown volume. Mm-hmm. There's no 10 touchdowns. You have to have the 16, 18 that he put up. You got to be there. You got to be in the mid-high teens to make up for it. But he did. Dylan Johnson, 18.5 points per game. He was even better than that. He gutted through a bad injury. I thought he had somebody said he had a broken foot or something after the season. He was in bad shape. But my God, that first 10 weeks with Dylan Johnson. So, I mean, and Audric Estime he also had too. So you're looking at 5 top to bottom running backs that he's trotting out in the flexes every week. And it just helped make up for the lack of sizzle out of his QB room. And when you're in a 4-point, 5-point passing touchdown league, you can take a league over with running backs. You really can. Some of these rosters, it's pretty clear. But you have to have one or the other with the QBs or the running backs, it seems, because JD had that loaded QB room with Chandler Rogers, Drake May, Shadur Sanders, those 3 big boys. Didn't have a high-end running back room, right? Damian Martinez, 16 a game, fine. LaKent Allen, 19. Okay, solid. He split the West Virginia room between C.J. Johnson and Jaheim White. savvy pickup on Jaheim White. What a down the stretch pull that was, because that, frankly, he just shuttled him right in. And then Darius Taylor, like basically Jaheim White took over and Darius Taylor got hurt. He had 6 games and he was out. Will Shipley, 15.5 points per game. But there's an example of sharing with Phil Maffa. Will Shipley coming into the season, top 10 running back, at least a low end RB1, would you say? Like around 10 to 15?
Yep.
15.5 a game. Inconsistent because of Maffa stealing vulture and touches. Not perfect, but good enough to get in there and get the job done. And then another one, you get to my team, which was the highest scoring in that league. Ashton Genty was a one-man room. He's the only QB, only running. He was 30 a game. He was on multiple of these teams again, and he was vital. Raymond Davis was excellent too. I had him. I had Genty and Helani. Dude, Jambris Duber. Okay, Helani put up 19 a game last year at Boise. Genty put up 30. Duber is going like late teens, early 20s. He's got to be respected in these freshman drafts because he isn't owned, in a lot of places. He's going to be out there. So that's something you have to expect too. One guy I wanted to talk about on the downside, I see Kyle Monangai. He's got the rocket strapped to his posterior, right? Went 3-7, I think, in our latest Champions League draft. It's fucking bold. This is Rutgers running back, baby.
Yeah.
And he was a product of volume, and he had his 1260 in terms of rushing yards. But another guy, single digit receptions.
Nothing.
I mean, they just don't throw. And with a guy like Monaghan, he was good last year. He only put up 14 a game.
So the problem with him is there's nothing in the pass game, and Rutgers is not scoring enough. Like he can run for 1,200 yards, but if he's only going to get 8 touchdowns, it's like we talked about. If you aren't getting production in the pass game, you have to be scoring. And unless Rutgers starts, he'll probably get some more goal lines carries this year without Gavin Wimsatt there, but it's still you're really gotta trust that Rutgers is gonna score more this year, and it just makes it pretty risky because you've got to have the touchdowns if you aren't getting any production in the pass game.
Amen. And you look at that, like my room and in this room that's competitive, he's RB6 on a point per game basis, and he's only a half game up ahead of Jalen Wright for Tennessee. I couldn't start Kyle Monangai a lot of weeks because if he's playing an upper echelon D, he's going to have to. He dealt with Penn State, he dealt with Michigan, he dealt with Ohio State.
That's the other thing with him. He was getting single digit points in those games. He was getting like 6 points when they were playing Penn State. So I need to go back and look at their schedule this year. But yeah, it's
not as bad because they switched up they don't have the risk, but it's still not great. You still got to deal with, and you're right. I do want to look at this.
You had a great room though. Adams at UMass.
Dude, yeah. Katron leading that one hurt to the core. You know how I felt about it. It's like, oh man, you got to go down there. But with we're just like, Monangai with Rutgers, their schedule, right? Not great, but they're gonna be favorites in some. It could be worse. It's better than last year. I mean, they got to deal with. They got Virginia Tech non-con, not great. Get the benefit of a retooling Washington. I don't mind having. Nebraska, fine. Wisconsin, okay, that's not great. But then UCLA, USC. To go, that's not bad. Minnesota, Maryland, Illinois, Michigan State. Holy crap!
That feels better. That feels better than last year.
55 in the country. That's better than I thought. They don't have any Michigan, Penn State, or Ohio State.
Yeah, they avoid all three of those. There could be some. It could be better.
Yep.
He's got to get the touchdown production.
He's got to be in the teens. Be just fine. 3rd round draft capital.
Yeah.
And I like him. Like, you watch the tape,
Yeah,
and he's
talented
good.
guy. Yeah.
He's good, and you get. I like to get eyes on these guys, but we're looking at college fantasy here. Like I said, 7th in a successful room. So we'll go down again. We'll go and hit winning edge before we go and bolt out of there. But the winner again there, we went through. We had May, Aguiar, Vadiato, and Castellanos. So, like you said, a good room, but not a room he invested in. Because of Jonathan Brooks, we know about him. Braylon Allen, DJ Giddens, Trey Benson, Devin Neal, Kyrie Robinson.
Okay.
Wow.
That's a good room.
Dude, if you want to be winning these big industry dynasty, just looking at the big league, it's a 20-team league. That is a nightmare of a room.
Yeah.
If you starting all 6 every week, throw in some Montrell Johnson at 14.5 points, it goes to show you with modern guy, 14 ain't doing it.
Right.
14 is a coin flip, on a weekly basis in some of these big rooms. So, and I'll do one more because this is Bainbridge too. We'll get him in, give him some love because he was number 2 points in that league. He was the runner-up. He had an excellent team, and he had Rodgers and Salter as well, along with Fowler, Nicolosi, and Ewers for his QB room. So like he had the top 2. He had the 2 big boys in Rodgers and Salter, which wasn't perceived to be a big 2 coming in. Solid, bye weeks with Ewers and Nicolosi. Running backs, Corum, as we discussed. But then, man, he was able to be very competitive, 2nd in points, with a legitimate G5 room outside of Corum. Ontario Brown, NIU, 16.5, like not killing it. Jalen Buckley, incredible. Jalen Buckley, Western Michigan, 17.5, almost 18. And then C. Bangura, 14 points a game at Ohio, before obviously Hunt's there now. But, he had his time. Harrison Whaley, 14.5 before he got banged up. And then Nathan Cotter at Michigan State, 11. Like, it isn't a big room, but it's a room that's consistent. And he got that production. Like, Jalen Buckley, second half, really helped him out big time. But not a sexy room. No. So there's more than one way to skin a cat, and that's why we'll get over to the wide receivers, but we'll take a break right now, our final one. All right, appreciate it. Before we go and hit the wide receivers, get over in the room like we do. Carp, appreciate you showing up, buddy, of course. And where the heck is Josh? I know. Josh is a very responsible person. He has a big child-related thing. I think it's a T-ball or something like that. He could elaborate more, but being the great dad he is, we gave him the night off. Bainbridge, no such luck. Where's Bainbridge? No call, no show. Yeah, he's getting married. It's all good. Anyways, wide receivers. So we'll get into that a little bit. Again, I love the historical retrospectives and kind of just go how this position has evolved over the past few years so that we can, you can see where it was and where it is now. In 2018, 56 receivers, right, had 100 plus targets. It's a pretty damn even split. 24 for the P5, 27 for the G5.
Okay.
Legitimately kind of surprising to see the G5 out targeting the P5 there. But then you went to receivers in 2018 with 1,000 yards with 37 of them. That production-wise, 20 P5, 17 G5, right? So you see the skill gap. That's what really comes into play, in my opinion, is the wide receivers, is the talent, the precision on the QB side too, just as important.
Yeah.
Was there. But, we fast forward over here, 2023, we went from 56 that had 100 last year, 42 in just 5 seasons, because there's no 2020. We've shaved pretty significant amount of targets off there, based off what we were looking at before. The distribution fairly similar again, though. 20 P5, 22 G5. Now, what I also found interesting is while the targets, 100 targets plus reduced, I find it interesting that in 2022, there were 80 wide receivers who got 90 plus targets. But last year, that dropped to 68 receivers with 90 plus targets. So, interesting wise, sharing the proportion we're looking at, it's less, and you get more of those. There just seems to be more talent, and it's being filled, especially on the G5 level, with just more and more talent. So they're able to kind of spread the ball out more thanks to the portal and starting to, bringing guys who fit their system. And it's kind of suppressing the overall volume. We'll go with the 1,000-yard wide receivers too. Another comparison: 37 in 2018, and last year that was 33. So again, a little bit ticking down. We're really a better one. What I also enjoy: wide receivers with 10 touchdowns. Okay. 2021, we had 18. 2018, we had 25. 2019, we had 25. 2020, 13. Excuse me, 2022, 13. 2023, again, goes up to 25.
Oh,
We had
wow.
a real outlier in 2022. So we can expect, and that's a pretty good trend because some of these are all over the board. We should be looking at 25 guys with 10 TDs or more. Okay,
Yeah.
what an outlier in 2022. But these guys are catching balls, even though, and they're putting them in, they're cashing them in, even with that reduced targets. Just keep in mind, targets went down from 53 to 42, but we went from 13, receivers having 10 touchdowns to 25. It doubled.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Very
is,
interesting.
yeah.
It's in terms of random stuff like that. Tell me just a little bit about what you look at, just in terms of an overview of that position before we get into some of the specifics.
Yeah, I mean, obviously the big thing is targets, right? The systems that are going to throw the ball a lot, or even I think one of the things too, we focus a lot on the air raid, right? The offenses that are going to throw the ball a lot, but I think you can also find some of these teams that maybe they're not throwing it as much. It's more of a 50-50 split where they're running, passing, but they really focus on one guy in that offense, right? Where you can really, like, there's just that one guy. So try and find some of those guys too, where I go through a lot of my play caller data and say, all right, this wide receiver one has like at least a 25% target share. I like to see it a little bit higher if it's not passing as much. Obviously in those air raids, it's closer. I look at anything, I start usually at 20 and then go from there. So it's a lot of the volume, right? Who's going to get the volume in this offense? I think so. For me, receiver is always it has the lowest hit rate in any type of league you're playing, right? Whether it's redraft, best ball, just because I think so many times there are so many guys that we don't know right now that are going to have a really solid season. And that's just whether it's injuries or we just have guys emerge. And one thing I was looking at, again, with just the draft, it's the receiver hit rate is the lowest out of the top three positions there by about 5% lower.
Mm-hmm.
But the other thing too is in a dynasty, you are getting less valuable seasons out of receivers. So you're going to have to hold them longer than you would a quarterback or a running back. So a lot of times you might be taking a young receiver and you're going to have to sit on him for longer than that 1 or 2 seasons just to get that season where you can actually have him in your lineup. I think the thing that's going to change this a little bit is the portal, where you're going to get, especially you're going to have those P5 guys that transfer down to a G5. They just aren't, making it at an Alabama or Ohio State, right? Where they're going to transfer out and maybe have a little bit more success somewhere else. But a receiver, to me, it's always it's one of the toughest to really hit in the draft. It's a place where you can really fill out your roster through waivers in season. So I think there's definitely some opportunity there. And really, when I look at just kind of how some of the better rosters have been in my league, it's very rarely you'll have some guys that were drafted, but a lot of these guys were picked up in season on waivers.
Yeah.
So
True.
to me, that's going to be kind of where you're going to find these guys. And it's a lot less. I play the systems a lot here. That's what I'm looking at. Who's going to throw the ball and who's going to have a high target rate. So that's really what I'm looking at receiver wise.
Yeah, and you make a great point of how, sure, again, with everything in these freshman drafts, you kind of look at those initial, the high-profile wide receivers. You want the Luther Burdens and the Tets and those guys. Even though Tet really, he wasn't that high. He was high-profile, but it was different. He didn't have that kind of buzz. He was still respected, though, but we didn't know. But how many of those are there, right? And then how many of those guys get dropped if they're not immediately right out of the gate productive? The C2C guys with the year 1-0 in terms of how it applies to the NFL level. You know what? It doesn't hurt for the CFF level too if you're going and dropping a goose. There are some exceptions, like Noah Rogers is one who, as you mentioned, transfers from Ohio State, does nothing there because it's just loaded. Goes over there to NC State, and now he's getting drafted in the seasonal leagues. So that can happen. In terms of an overview, some interesting data points that I had pulled out. I haven't updated them for 2023. I'll have that column coming out over the next few weeks and what have you. But just interesting trends of the 126,000 yard receivers with more than 60 receptions. Since 2018, from 2018 to 2022, I don't have last year, only 16 of them, which is 12.5%, did not reach the 100 target threshold. So, speaking of system, these high volume systems are where these down the board wide receivers emerge from.
Yeah.
And, you can go, and this is where, again, the power three, or, Chris K would call it the jumbo three, wide receiver three theory is collate your assets around powerful wide receiver rooms. That is a tried and true strategy, because a lot of times, like we talked about, in these good rooms, it isn't always a linear rise. It isn't always the guy, he has a higher 247 rating. In fact, frequently it doesn't happen that way. So that's always something to be aware of. And another thing, in terms of how rare it is, we get to the targets. The only player to post back-to-back seasons with 1,000 yards and 10 TDs with less than 100 targets, only been one in the last 8 years. It was CD Lamb. That's it. That's the list.
Wow.
So yeah, you might be able to get one. You're not popping two straight of sub 100. That just doesn't happen. It's such an outlier. That's outrageous. All you gotta do is be CD Lamb. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's it. Yeah. With Jalen Hurts throwing you and Kyler Murray. Yeah. Fine. Grow on trees. So, we'll wrap it on the wide receivers here. Let's get on to the tight ends, since we're getting up there, bumping up against time. With tight ends, I that is one of these positions. You've heard with me about the Tito's, why they're so potent. But system too.
Yeah.
It really, we talk about it all the time, but really is this consistency to this position that I get a kick out of, and that I appreciate. When it comes to what you're looking for, okay? You're looking for 50 targets, 500 yards, 5 touchdowns. That's like the basics right there. Okay, so 2023, we'll go through the numbers. 52 tight ends received 40 or more targets. That's like, I look at 40 targets, I'm like, you have to get it. You have to. If you're not getting 40, what can I really do with you?
Right.
Because you're extrapolating that over 12 games that we're playing with, in our season. 40? If you're at 48, that's 4 a game. Think about that. You're at 3.5. You maybe sometimes you're getting 2. You're killing me with that. So that's like just right out of the gate. I need it. Last year in 2022, they were 53. In 2023, 52. So
Okay.
we have a nice, all right, we got a group of 50. That's a pool to start from that we can at least try to go with. The most targets last year, Dallin Holker had a 105. It's outrageous.
Yeah.
Number 2 was Justin Jolly. And now, like, sure, I'm still interested in Justin Jolly, but bro, he's at NC State now. Like, no more 80 targets.
Yeah.
Enjoy. You're on a hurting team, and that's how it comes. So, like, do I have a share or two of Jolly? I think I have one. But and I like obviously NC State for the NI factor,
Yeah.
but don't expect 80. I'm just saying, and he's going in the P5, so tread lightly in that sense. Tight ends with 50 targets. 32 tight ends had 50 targets last year. Let's go into the breakdown. Okay, now we talked about the P5, G5 before. With the 40 targets, it's a 33-19 split. Okay, so all right, obviously you're gonna have a little favoritism towards the P5, but man, you get to 50 plus and you get to the rarefied air. 32 of them, 22 P5, 11 G5. All right, so it's a full 2-to-1 ratio, plain and simple. Goes to show you. I mean, that bears out. And when we're looking again, you want to go and project out. All right, well, what does that look like, and how does it break down in the production metric? Tight ends last year with 400 plus receiving yards and 4 touchdowns. There were 19 of them. 13 and 5 was the breakdown. P5 to G5. Massive difference. And we'll go to 505. 9 tight ends, 505. 6 to 3, P5 to G5. Dallin Holker was like a unicorn. So was RJ Maryland. Those dudes were the dudes. But we'll go back to 2022 with that, right? Tight ends with 500 yards and 5 touchdowns. There was 7 of them. 6 P5, 1 G5. Yeah. And that was pre-scoring, I believe. Went and transferred to Ole Miss. So, like, you came in last year cold on the G5. We have a little bit more to kind of work with here. But, that's a quick, brief overview. Give me a little more on your tight end theorem, Jack.
Yeah. No, that's some really interesting stuff. And you kind of see that in the drafts, just these best ball drafts anyways. You'll get the G5 guys, but they're the guys going a lot later in the drafts. Tight end is just such it's one of those, if you can grab one of those elite guys, you're in a really good spot for the dynasty. I don't think it's super critical to have one of those guys. When I look at, who's the teams that really compete year in and year out, they might have a top 10 guy on their team, but it's, it definitely feels like it's more crucial to have like the running backs, the quarterbacks. I find myself, what I want to do is, and I don't know if this is right or not, but I just like to grab 3 to 4 guys, depending on roster size.
That sounds right. Yeah.
3 to 4 guys that are right kind of, obviously you want to get an elite guy anytime you can. But I'm also happy with those guys in that kind of 10 to 20, 25 range where you might be doing some streaming, you're playing matchups with those guys, and you're also looking at guys or offenses that are going to throw the ball a little bit more and have shown to target that tight end. But like you just went over, those tight ends just aren't getting a ton of targets outside of those top few guys. And so the other thing you're looking at red zone targets, who is targeting tight ends in the red zone? Maybe they're only going to get 3 to 4 targets a game, but 1 or 2 of those are going to be in the red zone. So that just gives you the better opportunity for the 6 points. So that's something I like to try and pull out too, is the red zone guys, who are the big athletic tight ends that they're going to use in the red zone. So that's one thing I look at too. I don't spend a ton of time on tight ends though, to be honest. It's Again,
Nobody does.
I'll try and grab, a handful of guys that I just feel are solid guys, and then if I can get that elite tight end, I'll definitely take him. But that's kind of how I look at it.
I feel like a lot of people have that kind of cobble it together strategy.
Yeah.
Um, uh, and we'll get to the roster specifically on that. Unfortunately, we're bumping up against the time. Sorry, we couldn't do more on the wide receiver front. We'll try to get that more on next week. But just in terms of the overall position overview, if I've been diving into this stuff, as you can tell, very interesting thing. Among the 505 tight ends last year, right? The 9 of them. The average, actually, we'll go with 2022 first. In 2022, there were, as stated, 7 505 tight ends. It took them an average of 78 targets to get there. A lot of targets
That's a lot
required to get there. Interestingly, last year, of the 9, so there was 2 more 505 tight ends, and then so there's 9. Only took 59 targets instead of 78 to get to there.
Wow.
There's more of them.
Yeah.
So we have, and a few of those guys, quite a few of them are back. Like we have a good tight end group this year. I think that. That the 50 to 60, I think you can get away with it. I think that you saw quite a few with 51, a couple 51, 52s. Very interesting, in my opinion, in terms of how that kind of played out. One more little metric to go. Schools. I went back the past 3 years. Schools who produced 505 tight ends. A couple of them stand out. One, Georgia, obviously. I mean, you got Brock Bowers. You're gonna look good, but they also have obviously Delp and Urosic, but maybe those guys cannibalize each other. Another one, Jay Norvell tight ends. Colorado State last year, 2022, nobody, 2021, Nevada.
Yeah.
So both,
yeah.
and those are 2 guys who didn't get drafted. Holker didn't get drafted. He's not an NFL guy, and neither was the last one. I forget his name, escapes me, but he had 100 targets too. So you're talking about
at Nevada.
Yeah, who was it?
Cole Turner.
Turner. So those are the last 200 target tight ends over the past 3 years too. There isn't another one. Those are the 2.
Yeah.
Gotta look at the eventual. I will be paying attention over the summer and seeing who's replacing Dallin Holker. Everybody should.
That's a big one. Yeah.
It's a big one. Other teams that show up twice. Memphis.
Yeah.
In 2 different ways, right? Memphis is no joke. They come up again and again, right? I mean, their offense is so legit. They're the class of the G5. They probably should get an invite one of these years up. I mean, I just everything they do has to be respected. And they lost Priestcorn. Well, whoever's next, there you go.
Yeah.
Have some. Another team, Utah, obviously. They didn't have one last year, but in 21 and 22. I mean, they're just Utah. You have to respect them. Obviously, Notre Dame, they didn't have one last year, but it was, because of injury, of course. And
what about, I would think, I'm just taking a guess here. What about Brian Brom, Purdue, Louisville? Was that up there?
Purdue. Yeah, Purdue has a season, not last year at Louisville, but 2022 Purdue. He is up there and he's in that. He was not there the year before. Let me check.
Okay.
For my numbers of 2021, actually of 2019, because we didn't have 2020. Brian Brom was there. Yeah, Purdue was there in 2019, of course, as you're mentioning. And like I said, the thing that really got them last year is they kind of had a rotating cast.
Yeah.
They had two guys kind of switched on and off out of that. So, yeah, absolutely. Obviously, Andy Ludwig is, every year they're there.
Yeah.
Penn State, you have a hard time because they produce the tight ends, but they produce 2 at a time.
Yeah.
They always do.
Yeah.
They split it right down the middle traditionally. You had a little more with Freiermuth, of course, but otherwise, they've been splitting it. Otherwise, I thought it was interesting. Cincinnati, Denbrock as an OC. He
Mm.
was there a couple times in 2019, and now I believe he's still. Is he still at LSU? I forgot. Jesus. That was interesting. Iowa State makes a couple appearances.
Yeah.
Okay, Tom Manning uses the tight end. Okay, it's how it is. Obviously, last year I don't think they hit it last year, but they were close. Like,
Yeah.
I think they have a damn good shot this year because you got year
With
2
Brahmer. Yeah.
with Brahmer, with Big Bad Ben Brahmer.
Yeah.
So those are just a few if we're talking system wise, and toss in Ole Miss for Charlie Weiss because they had a big one on.
It's a good
Charlie
one.
Weiss had a couple here and there, especially at FAU. Obviously, they had the other Turner, or the other Hayden. I don't know. There's 2 of them. Hayden Hurst. That was him, right?
Yeah.
So that's it. Anything you want to say to tie up the tight ends?
No, I think you covered it well. Dynasty, it's fun. I love Dynasty, and it's trying to figure out the how to piece the roster together just as a whole. It's my favorite type of league to be in. I've done it since, I think my first year I did it was 2018, and I still feel like I'm, like every year it's evolving just with all the changes with the portal and everything.
Yes.
So it stays pretty fresh, and it's just a fun format to really participate in.
A couple things to put it out just to wrap up tight ends. Again, I love these little stats. In 2018, 37 tight ends received 40 targets. As discussed, that was 52 last year. So that's a 43% increase. Not bad. We'll take that, obviously. I like it. All right. Well, I appreciate you here, Zach. The first duo, I think.
Yeah.
One we did. I hope we rolled through it rather effectively. We tried to get all your stuff in. I appreciate it. And thanks everybody for listening. I will, like I said, I'm working on those columns, so I'll have, these are little tidbits I have from them. They will be coming out over the course of the next few weeks. They will be on Fantrax. I'm putting all my college fantasy stuff on Fantrax, just so everybody knows. For this summer, I'll be transitioning back over to NBC Sports after we hit the season. But, for CFF, I am putting that all out there. I want to spearhead that charge and make sure that I put my best work out there so that everybody who's joining, who's playing CFF, can have those resources all right there where you're going to play. It's a very important thing for me, so I'm really excited about it. Thanks to all who listen. Carp, again, appreciate it. Clint Carlson's in there too. Let me give it up for Clint Carlson. Obviously, Steve Jackson. Clint Carlson is a guru in the best ball scene. Won the 2022 Champions League best ball, so we appreciate him, of course. And as always, do small things with great love.
What? Why are you shaking your head?
You're welcome.